Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm so happy to be joined once again by Dr. BJ Fogg, the Behavior Design Lab founder at Stanford University. In addition to his research there, he teaches industry innovators how human behavior really works. He has created the Tiny Habits Academy that has helped thousands around the world and currently splits his time between Northern California and Maui. Thank you, BJ, for once again being on the program.
Aloha, Charles. I'm so happy to be with you again. Hello.
All right. Well, today's episode, last time we focused on behavior design. Today, I'd really like to focus on habits, how we form good habits and stop the bad habits that are holding us back. So my first question really is around that. What is a habit and why do we form them?
Habit is a type of behavior. So behavior is a big category. Habit is a subset, and it's a behavior you do quite automatically without thinking, without deliberating, without deciding. If you're deciding about something, that's a pretty big signal. It's not a habit. Do I go to the gym today or not go to the gym? Do I go to the gym? But if you just walk out of work and walk to the gym and go without thinking, then that is an indicator that's a stronger habit. So that is what a habit is something you do quite automatically.
And they form, what's the benefit of us having habits?
There's other people that have studied this and people have heard this before, but certainly the things we do consistently and repeatedly, and Charles, you talk about this a lot, have a big impact on our life. And habits don't have to be something we do. I mean, you can have a habit that you do infrequently, and we do not have a good English word for that. And I'm not going to geek out about that. But most habits, or most things we think about are habits we do daily or we do regularly or multiple times a day. And it's those things that we do consistently that has a huge impact on what happens in our lives, both personally and professionally. So at the end of the day, really, the habits we have determine where we go and where we end up to a large extent.
And I've read in some studies that as much as 50% of our day is done on kind of autopilot with habits. Would you agree with that? I mean, I've seen in my case anyway, with my day, there's some days where almost the entire day is spent on autopilot.
Yeah. Well, it depends how you define habit, right? And so if this were an academic conference, 4 people were on the panel, would probably all argue about what a habit is, and therefore you can't come up with a number. So it would have to be a position of what is a habit. But I think what everyone would agree with is a massive part of what we do during the day are things we do quite automatically. Don't know what the number is because you would have to somehow find it and you'd have to operationalize it and run a, valid and reliable study. But the point and the takeaway is, a huge part of what we do are habits, yes.
And I think a lot of leaders now are looking at habit science, habit design, and really focusing on that because there's 2 great quotes that I like around this topic. I mean, one is by Tim Ferriss in his book, Tools of Titans, that states most successful people succeed not because they don't have any weaknesses, but they succeed because they've developed habits around their unique strengths. So it's all about habit formation. And the other one, with Warren Buffett is the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. So we don't realize the habits that we're making until, we have them, and then it's much more difficult to get rid of them.
I'm going to build on that a little bit, go maybe in a direction you're not expecting. It was probably 12 years ago or so where the word habit was mostly had negative valence, had negative meanings to it. But the valence or how we think of that word, at least in, US English or linguistic groups that I'm involved with, has become more and more positive over time. And the reason I know this, for me, the marker in my mind, it was about 8 years ago. My sister Linda and I went to Weight Watchers headquarters to work with the then CEO, awesome CEO of Weight Watchers. He has since then left and they've not done as well. And we were working with them on streamlining their program. And one of the things we talked about and really got them focused on was habits. And then when they updated us on one of their programs, it's like, we're going to change not to habits, we're calling them routines. And I was like, why that? Well, because we think habits is just too negative. People think smoking and midnight snacking. It's like, okay, I get it. People wouldn't say that anymore. So even within that window, at least in American English or the people I associate with most, I mean, I don't know how to define that linguistic. The valence, habit has become a much more positive word than it used to be, which I think is great. I mean, a habit can be something we like or not like. I mean, they all form in the same way. They start small and they find where they fit and they get nourished. Good habits and bad habits form in the same way. And in some ways, they're exactly the same thing, except for we culturally or personally say, oh, that's a bad habit. And that's a good habit. Really, whether they're good or bad is really more what we or the culture determines. It's getting up at 2 a.m. and eating chocolate cake. Is that a good habit or a bad habit? Well, in our cultures, it's probably not a great habit. It's a habit that most people would want to stop.
You're right. And I'm so glad that term is now found more favor because it's really popular right now. And I'm really fascinated by the way habits can either reinforce our identity or help us change our identity to something that is more desirable. Do you agree with that close connection with
Yes.
identity change?
Yes, I talked about this years ago. In 2010, I was goofing around with my own behavior, trying to figure out how do I change behavior, and came up with the method that I eventually called the Tiny Habits method. And it worked amazing in my life. So in 2011, I started teaching it publicly, and I created this 5-day program in 2011, and it worked for other people. And so I would coach people personally in email over the course of 5 days and ended up doing, it caught on pretty quickly, 200 to 400 people a week, which was a lot, but week after week after week, coaching all these people. And then I would evaluate it every week because that's what I do. I'm a researcher. I study things and try to improve it. And one of the things I saw in the qualitative feedback, people like, they were indicating they thought of themselves differently. And so then I included that as part of the weekly evaluation I did. And so that probably started in 2013 or 14. And it was really clear that as people do habits and feel successful, it will then change how they think about themselves. I'm now the kind of person who can change. I'm the kind of person who can be nice to myself. I'm the kind of person who can eat healthy food and so on. So it was 10 years ago or so, and then started measuring it 8 or 9 years ago, clear connection between identity shift and people creating habits. There was a clear connection there. Now, the mechanism of why that happens is hard to unpack, and I've not run an experiment to say this is exactly what's going on. I have a sense of that, but what is clear in my data and has been clear for a long time is that when people do a new habit and feel successful, that will then change their identity, the way they think about themselves.
That's great to hear and we'll get into that celebration part, especially toward the end of this episode. Let's just remind our listeners that they didn't hear the previous episode. Behavior change happens when, so we can unpack the model and kind of get into more of the details of how to form good habits first. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to tackle those bad habits.
In the bigger realm, the world of behavior, all behavior types, habits, one-time actions, stopping, temporary actions, etc. All behaviors are characterized by motivation, ability, prompt. And I call that the Fogg behavior model. Turns out it really is that simple. Motivation, ability, prompt, at least simple to say. So if you want a behavior to happen, there's got to be some motivation for it. You have to have ability for it, and you increase your ability if it's simple or easy to do. There's going to be a prompt, something that says, do this behavior now. And if any one of those is missing, the behavior will not happen. Okay. So whether you're thinking about getting yourself to clean the garage one time or getting yourself to, let me pick a really weird example, take off your shoes when you get to the threshold of your home. That's not a weird example in many parts of the world, but in the US, it is a little odd. Those behaviors will only happen if you have motivation, ability, and a prompt. So that applies to all behavior types.
And there's a compensatory relationship between ability and motivation,
Yes.
which is good to understand and to know, because if it's going to be really difficult to do, ability is going to be hard, then you better be really motivated to do it, right?
In 2007, I mapped this out in a graphic that we're not showing right now, but you can go to behaviormodel.org and see this graphic. And there's a curved line on the graphic. And that's what it shows, is it shows there's a relationship between motivation and ability. The harder the behavior, the more motivation you need to do it. On the flip side, the easier the behavior, the lower your motivation can be. And that was that second part that led to the tiny habits method. I was looking at the graphic of my own model, Fogg behavior model. I was like, oh, here the lower right-hand corner. And if you are just listening and care, go to behaviormodel.org and look. In the lower right-hand corner, if a behavior is really easy to do, then my motivation can be it could be high, but it also could sag and be relatively low if it's easy to do. And I thought, so that means, this is like 2010, if I make a habit really, really easy to do, then I don't have to rely on motivation very much. Okay, let me try that. And that's what led to the tiny habits method, where it is a method for designing habits where you don't rely on motivation or willpower because you make the habit so easy to do. And that is a hack, right? That really wasn't a thing back then, where you really deal with the reality as a human motivation going up and down over time. And rather than trying to like learn to motivate yourself, you instead went to the other component in the model, ability, and you made it really easy to do, which we have more control over. We have more control over making something easy to do than where our motivation might be at any given moment.
You're right. It's such an effective model to use. Let's pick an example of a good habit that you want to start and kind of walk through just a general overview of the model. Let's say you want to floss your teeth more in the morning. So it's something that you want, greater hygiene with. So the first thing is that identifying that aspiration, right? To say, okay, that's what I want to do. Then you identify ways or behaviors that you can identify that will get you to do it, right? So you break it down at that aspiration, that outcome into something more tangible, these observable behaviors. You kind of crispify them, making sure they're detailed enough so you have that understanding. And then once you've identified kind of those golden behaviors, those that have high impact, that are easy to do, that you're motivated to do, then you're road testing them, right? And it's a very iterative process in which you are road testing these golden behaviors. Some are going to work better than others, but you have checkpoints along the way to really improve the likelihood of success, correct?
Yeah. So let me go a step further. So in the tiny habits method, you design it into your existing routine. So you could see my reaction on flossing, and you know why, Charles. I'm a huge, huge flossing fan. And that's actually one of the things that got me started with all of tiny habits was already know how to floss. That's not the problem. I just don't know how to floss automatically. I don't know how to make it a habit. And so what I did with that, looking at my own model and putting it to the test, it's like, okay, if I make flossing really easy to do, then it won't matter much where my motivation is. So I made it easy to do by thinking I'm going to floss one tooth. I also bought floss that was super thin and would go between my teeth. And I also left the floss right on the sink. Okay. So notice all those things make it easy to do. But, I talk about floss one tooth. Well, but there are other ways to make it easy. You don't want the floss hidden in the back of the cabinet. You don't want floss that's really hard to use. And then you say, okay, I got it. Now it's tiny. What does it come after? Okay, so now you're designing the prompt. So in the behavior model, you got motivation, ability, prompt. So ability, we already took care of, is floss one tooth. What does it come after? So in the tiny habits method, you use an existing routine, something you already do to be your prompt. And so it's like, after I brush, I will floss one tooth. So that's what tiny habits we call a recipe. After I will. After I brush, I will floss one tooth. And, in developing the recipe format, Charles, I thought, well, maybe I should say it this way. I will floss one tooth after I brush, right? And I explored iterations of that. This would be like in 2010 and 11 and decided, no, the best way is after I will. So after I brush, I will floss one tooth. So that's the tiny habit recipe. So you know exactly what you're doing. You've made it easy and you have a prompt. Okay. And that works really well. Okay. So there's kind of an obvious place where flossing fits into our lives. Not so obvious might be something like, reading a book or reading. So in the case of reading, make it super tiny. And one thing I would advocate is read one sentence or one paragraph. Okay. Start, focus on that and then say, okay, and don't be afraid to make it one sentence, people. I know that sounds ridiculous, but 1, 2 sounds ridiculous. And I'll talk about how it expands and so on. And then say, well, what does it come after? Where does reading fit naturally in my existing routine? So if you think of your routine, where does this fit in? And it might be after I go to my afternoon coffee break and sit down at this bench, I will read one paragraph in my book. Okay, so that's your tiny habit recipe. After I sit down on the bench, morning break, I will read one paragraph. So you've got your tiny habit recipe designed and you implement. Now, both on the, and I know how people react to the one tooth and one sentence. They're like, well, what about your other teeth? And do you ever get through the book? In the tiny habits method, you set the bar really low, 1 tooth, one sentence, one paragraph. And when you want to do more, you do as much as you want. You floss on your teeth, you read a whole chapter, even on day 1. But what you're doing is setting the bar so low that you don't need a lot of motivation to do it and you don't have resistance. But when you want to do more, you do more. But you don't raise the bar. When you don't want to do more, you just floss that one tooth and you move on and say, good for me. Or you read that one sentence and say, good for me. But you will find that you will naturally do more most of the time. Okay. So that's one of the hacks in the tiny habits method is you make it just so easy to succeed, but you also allow yourself to do more when you want to. When your motivation is higher, you do more.
And that's so critical with making it tiny so that I found like when I was trying to do 50 push-ups, just doing one push-up. And I found when I got on the floor and did one push-up, I normally did more than one push-up, right? Having that starter step, having that initial step to make it so easy that it's so easy for you to do is so essential. And then finding the prompts that really will stack it, that you can stack it behind is so essential. And you mentioned in the book is match the physical location, the frequency, and hopefully the theme and purpose. So with flossing, it's in the bathroom and flossing happens every day after you brush your teeth. So you're matching the physical location in the bathroom, usually the frequency every day. And then the theme and purpose is pretty much the same with personal hygiene. So, those are additional ways in which to get that prompt to connect stronger with the habit that you already have throughout the day.
Yeah. The way you design the tiny habit recipe, which is the after I will, those two components. And Charles, you went deeper and I talk about this in the book, Tiny Habits, like what makes a good pairing, and so without reading the book, you can guess and so on and do, because you can learn and discover. But we have figured out, when I say we, it's me along with the Tiny Habits coach, Tiny Habits team, we now really know how to dial it in. So you can be very good at designing the recipes. Like, how do you make it small enough? And then what is it going to come after? And what things are likely to work. Now, after I coached 10,000 people in the Tiny Habits method, I was invited to speak at an academic conference. And I think the title was, what I learned about habits after coaching 10,000 people. And I learned a lot, right? And so it's interesting to me to go back to those slides and look what I was talking about back then, after 40,000 people and 60,000 people. And guess what? After 10,000 people, you kind of you've seen it all. Right? It's just more, maybe you see a little odd thing or whatever, but the patterns of what works and the pattern of what doesn't work are pretty clear after you've worked with 10,000 people. And, when somebody designs a tiny habit recipe of after I get up in the morning, I will clean the garage, that's not going to work. Right? It's like, and so when coaching people, it's like, no, first of all, who's thought about cleaning the garage, make it much, much smaller. And after you get up in the morning, it's not a specific action and, you'll be in your bedroom and, so you talk about, so there are things that as you get more expert and learn about how to create the recipes, you can just dial it in much, much faster than filling in the blanks after I will.
I completely agree. And you're right. That's a way to do it. The final step, which I think is one of the big takeaways, is make it tiny. And I think that's been, a lot of people know that, but I think the one huge takeaway for me, because I get this a lot from people saying, so how long does it take to wire a habit in? There's no fixed time period, but they're missing a critical element of the process if they don't do this. And that's finding ways to celebrate. If you can associate a strong positive emotion with that behavior, you're going to wire it in fast. There's a direct connection between how you feel when you do the behavior and the likelihood that you're going to repeat it in the future. And I can't stress that point enough. I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit more, BJ, because I think, like what you stated, if you could teach one thing, this would be the first thing you teach.
Yeah.
And this is perhaps, if not the most important, it's one of the most important pieces of the model.
Yeah. And maybe the three most important words from our 30 minutes together is emotions create habits. And that's a chapter of my book in Tiny Habits. It's not repetition. It's not other things that people say. It's emotions. And so when you do a behavior and you have a strong, positive emotional payoff, then it becomes more automatic. Now, in the Tiny Habits method, you don't leave that emotion a chance. You hack it. You cause yourself to feel this positive emotion. So in other words, you deliberately self-reinforce. So you deliberately self-reinforce so the habit forms quickly. In the 5-day Tiny Habits program, again, that we've offered for over 10 years, the vast majority of people within 5 days report that one of their habits, and they work on 3 habits, became automatic or very automatic within the 5-day window. Okay. And we have thousands and thousands of examples of where people have wired in habits quickly, but it is a function of their emotion in doing the behavior immediately after. Did the emotion reinforce it? Now, if you reinforce yourself 30 days later, that's not a reinforcement of that behavior. Your brain has to associate the action of sipping water or opening the book or flossing your tooth with this positive emotion. And again, you can hack that. Some people are better than others. The technique's called celebration, and we can teach people how to do that. But some people are natural at it. Some people are really resistant. And there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. So it's like any other skill. And the better you are at self-reinforcing, we call celebration. And I'll just use the term, the better you are at self-reinforcing, faster you can create habit. It's like the superpower for creating habits is the ability to self-reinforce.
I mean, I agree with you completely on that. That's something that people really need to take. It's highly individualized and customized. Immediacy and intensity are keys. It kind of can seem a little bit silly or contrived when you're celebrating over just flossing one tooth, but it works. It's the superpower, like BJ stated, and it can't be reinforced enough. He provides a lot of great ways to create that authentic shine, from private celebrations to public celebrations to that power celebration. If you really want to wire in habits fast, this is an essential piece that you can't skip over.
Yeah, it's, in coaching the thousands of people, Wednesday in the 5-day program was the day when I said, look, you're probably not celebrating, because you probably dismissed it, but you really need to. And then I remember people would write back saying, yeah, but why should I celebrate this? And it's like, well, if you want it to become a habit quickly, learn how to self-reinforce. And if people said, no, I'm not celebrating, it's like, it's your choice. It's your choice if you don't want the habit to form quickly. Just like if you're learning to play the violin, and there's a certain way to hold the bow that feels a little weird to people. And if a student says, no, I'm going to hold it my way, I'm going to hold it like a baseball. Well, the teacher's like, well, you'll never be great, but if you want to hold it like a baseball bat, I guess you can, but you will never progress like somebody who's doing the technique. And so the celebration piece is a technique. It's very different. It's like some people get it because they've already done it naturally, but I've coached enough people who are like, oh, this is insane. This is crazy California thing. This is the only thing that we can't do this here in the UK because we're not like that. But humans, we get reinforced. Reinforcement means it's something that happens that causes the behavior to become more automatic. Emotions can reinforce, and we can cause ourselves to feel emotions that will reinforce habits. That's the chain right there. And so the better you are at that, the faster you can create habits. And if you're really good at it, you can create habits like almost instantly. I mean, we have studied instant habits where you do it once and it wires in. Like this is a pen. Well, it's actually this color pen that one of my students, Stephen Crane, gave me about a year and a half ago. And I had a different pen that I loved so much, but he gave me this one. So this is my favorite. I used it and it's like, This is even better than my purple pen. Oh my gosh. So guess what? No more purple pens. This type of pen, blue or black, is the only one I use because it writes better and it makes me feel like my handwriting's better and it makes you feel happier and it's smoother, right? So this is a one and done. And we have so many products like that in our lives. New shoes, a new car. You don't have to work on, driving the car 66 times for it to become a habit. You drive the car and it makes you feel awesome and empowered. It's probably going to become a habit quickly. Anyway, there's a whole category of instant habits, which helps people understand that there are ways to create habits very, very quickly. And it's not dependent on repetition. It's dependent on our emotions when we do that new behavior.
That is such a critical distinction that more people really need to hear if they want to form habits quickly and make them last. Before we end today's episode, I'd like to just talk a little bit about how do we stop bad habits, which we follow a similar process. You've identified the bad habit, you've identified behaviors that contribute to it, but you have the analogy, which I love this analogy, it's about a tangled knot. And if you could just go through that just briefly for our listeners so they know, okay, here's what we should do first, second, and then here's the most effective way to try to rid ourselves of some of these.
Yeah. I know our time is limited. And there's a chapter in my book just on this. Let me give two quick answers. One, all behaviors will happen when there's motivation, ability, prompt. So if for that unwanted habit, like in my life, and it was eating ice cream in the evening while watching TV. Okay. So if you can reduce motivation, ability, prompt. Can I take away the motivation for eating ice cream? No, right? Because it's wired in. Can I reduce the ability, make it harder to do? Yes. Can I remove the prompt? Probably not, because the prompt is just sort of this urge. I want ice cream. So the lever I have to play with is ability, make it harder to eat ice cream. And we did that by creating a policy in our home. There'd be no ice cream in the home. So then when you get prompted and want ice cream, it's like, there's no ice cream unless we go to the store. No, we're not doing that. We're just going to have yogurt and put some apples in it. So that's one quick answer. My second answer is the idea of breaking a bad habit sets up the wrong expectation. It's like it suddenly is broken. Whereas a better way, and I talk about this in Tiny Habits, is you untangle the unwanted habit. So it's a process. And you don't start with the tangle that's the tightest in the middle. You start with the easiest one and you deal with that. So let's say unhealthy snacking is a general bad habit you want to address. Well, what type of unhealthy snacking is just the easiest thing for you to not do? Oh, it's eating potato chips on my lunch hour. Great. So you either make that harder to do or stop that. And you go from little by little, you untangle till you're free from that habit. So two different ways of thinking about it, both relate to behavior design and tiny habits. The process of creating habits is relatively simple and quick and easy compared to the breaking habits that people talk about. I mean, some habits are super easy to break, but the ones we're talking about here, like people eat or anger or media use, or can be difficult habits. And to say there's just one way to do it and to say it's easy to stop a bad habit is misleading people. It's complicated. Whereas creating habits is pretty straightforward. A tiny habits method, make it simple, find where it fits, reinforce your emotion. All habits will form in that way, good and bad. But then getting rid of unwanted habits is a much more complicated landscape. And so I just want to say that because I don't want to be too simplistic about the challenges. It may not be as simple as just setting up a policy in the home. There's no ice cream, right? That one worked. That absolutely worked. But that's not something like media use or emotions where you can say, okay, we're not going to have any media home or we can't feel any emotions, right? So things can get more complicated. There are ways to address it. I'll just say this because I feel I should. If there is a habit that is harming you or others, get professional help from somebody who specializes in that type of habit. Okay. This podcast is not enough. Nobody's book is sufficient for that kind of thing. Go get professional help. But then there's a bunch of them like, eating ice cream and maybe staying up late at night that you can deal with on your own. So stopping habits is a complicated landscape. And I just don't want to trivialize how important it is to have a nuanced and multifaceted approach to that area.
Thank you, BJ. You can find his book, Tiny Habits, anywhere books are sold, especially your local bookstores. He has chapters on how to break those bad habits. As we reach the end of this episode, love for you to share the one habit that you recommend everyone to do at the beginning of the day. You call it the Maui habit.
The Maui habit, and that's where I am right now. First thing in the morning, as your feet touch the floor and you're in bed, say, it's going to be a great day. So the recipe is, after my feet touch the floor in the morning, I will say, it's going to be a great day. All right. So I've done that for a long time now, and thousands of people do that. And it really does work. Okay. And even if you feel like it's not going to be a great day, go ahead and say it anyway, and you'll still see the impact. Now, there's more behind that, but that's a special habit. And it's a great way to start your day, and it does make a difference.
Thank you, BJ, for joining me again today on the podcast. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
bjfogg.com is sort of the place where you can get to my other work on Tiny Habits. Go to tinyhabits.com and you'll see some things there. Free 5-day program in Tiny Habits where you work with a coach that I'd help train. So a real human helps you, and it's free and very effective. I mean, so we take a lot of pride in the fact that that program is designed to be the fastest way to learn about habits and create new habits in your life. And that is the starting point for other things.
Thank you so much for being on the program today. Really appreciate it.
Welcome. Thank you.